the sound system and everything else. So I'm going to need help having things read, and we're only going to be in 2 different chapters versus chapters in 38 and 39 this morning anyway. And so hopefully we'll get through that. So Dan mentioned last week that this is the week that he's been waiting for, because if you've ever read through the book of Job before, you'll know that he has 4 friends, 3 main friends, and then Elihu. And Job responds to them. And it is very clear that none of them have a true understanding of what is going on. There is a spiritual battle taking place. Job is at the center of it, and he doesn't realize that. And of course, the friends, they are following their theology of the day, which means if you are rich and you are healthy, you are obviously a righteous man and God is blessing you. If you are sick or poor, obviously you are a sinner and God has cursed you. And so they keep encouraging him to his wife says, just curse God and die. His friends say, repent, confess all your sins. And Job is going, okay, I know I'm not perfect. I'm not a sinner, but I don't deserve this. Lord, what are you doing? I thought you were my friend. So we're going to get into finally now God's response to Job. And what is interesting is that God never specifically answers Job's questions. Okay? What he does is put the whole thing into perspective. And the perspective basically is God is God. We are nothing but mere humans. Okay? We are even the most brilliant among us are limited in our understanding of the universe and what is going on. And so we may think we're really smart, but compared to God, we're not. And so basically, we're going to see God saying to Job, who do you think you are anyway? And, so we're going to see God as this great creator who has put everything into existence and holds everything into existence. And so who are we to even question God? And so, again, that may seem unfair, but it's not really unfair at all. It's putting things into perspective. Now, again, there's multiple themes going on in the book of Job. One would be the sovereignty of God. And you definitely see that in these 2 chapters. God lets Job know that he is still God. He doesn't need our advice. He knows how to run the universe. Another theme, of course, is why do the righteous suffer? It's very understandable if you see a very evil, wicked person and God has judged them. And we've just seen that. If you've read through 1st and 2nd Kings, you've seen what God has done to the nation of Israel and to the nation of Judah through their wickedness. That's totally understandable. But what if you're a quote-unquote righteous person and you're suffering? What's going on here? That's a big question. And then, of course, there's the whole theme of this spiritual battle. And we see this addressed by the Apostle Paul in the book of Ephesians, that we are involved in spiritual battle. We war against powers and principalities of the air that we cannot see. And I've mentioned before that I really, really love John Lennox, who is a professor from England. He debates atheists all the time. And one of the things he keeps telling them is this: you are neglecting an entire part of the universe. You see everything from a totally materialistic point of view. Okay? So that everything can be explained through the material world. You are totally ignoring the fact that there's a spiritual dimension to the universe. And God is spirit. And unless you recognize that, you're never going to come to true faith. So, all right. So, we're going to get into chapters 38 and 39. And the first one here, I'm going to need a volunteer to read verses 1 through 11 as we talk about God questions Job about the earth and seas. Would somebody read verses 1 through 11, please?
Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now gird up your loins like a man, and I will ask you, and you instruct me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who set its measurements, since you know? Or who stretched the line on it? Or what were its bases sunk on what? Or who laid its cornerstone? when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who enclosed the sea with doors, when, bursting forth, it went out from the womb? When I made a cloud its garment, and thick darkness its swathing band, and I placed boundaries on it, and set a bolt of doors, and I said, thus far you shall come, but no farther, and here shall your proud ways stop.
Okay, so again, another one of my favorites is Dr. James Tour. He is a Messianic believer. He is a professor down in Texas. He is an absolute genius. And he has debated a lot of these other scientists on the origin of life. In fact, he even put out 5 questions. And he said, if you can answer any of my questions, I will take down all of my posts online. All of them. Well, all of these people he challenged, none of them could give him an answer. And basically, he's also given them a challenge. He said, okay, now here are the building blocks of life. We have been able to identify these specific things. Now, I am going to give them to you, okay? But tell me how to put them together to cause life. And they can't do it. And what he is saying is that as scientists delve into the universe and into the human body and to the human cell, instead of getting closer all the time to the answer of how life began, we are getting further and further away. Because the more we understand, the more complicated everything gets. And so basically, this is what God is doing here. He's challenging Job. And again, Job had none of the advantage of the modern sciences that we have today. But yet, the ancients understood a lot about life that we don't understand. And so he's basically saying, where were you when I created the whole thing? You know, are you the one who gave me advice? And so, anyway, it says, God spoke. God did not, however, give him an explanation for his suffering, nor did he list Job's sins, as the counselors possibly would have wanted. God merely exposed Job to the wonders of his power and creation. With great effectiveness, God's words demonstrated how limited is human knowledge. No matter how the counselors went on and on and on about their own wisdom, in the end, none of Job's questions were answered specifically. Nevertheless, after he had heard the words of the Lord, Job was drawn back to a complete faith and worship in his Creator and Savior. So we've talked about this before. There's certain things that we can grasp, okay? I can count to 10, okay? Because I have 10 fingers, you know, I have 10 toes. Anything beyond that is a challenge for me. But give me the mark of infinity, and my mind just cannot go there. To think of something being infinite, I am so used to this space-time continuum that we live in, and everything being closed in, that I cannot even fathom what infinity is. And so my mind, after a certain point, just has to shut it down. I just have to accept it. Now, when we say that the universe is an infinite, it's difficult for me to understand. I mean, I can understand planet Earth. You know, I can maybe understand our solar system to a certain degree, but get beyond that, and it's just unbelievable. And so this is one of the things I think that God is trying to impress upon Job, is he is a mere human being. Okay? His friends are mere human beings, and they do not understand the whole situation. God did not appear in a vision, but rather spoke to Job how?
Storm.
Right, so remember as we were reading through 1 Kings, chapters 18, 19, 20 in that section. Remember Elijah and the prophets of Baal? And he has this great victory, and he runs ahead of Ahab on the way back to Samaria. Then Jezebel confronts him, and he runs and hides. And he's in a cave. And what happens? Yeah, there's different things happen. You know, there's the earthquake, the fire, and everything. And finally, there's the still small voice, you know, who asks him, Elijah, what are you doing here? You know. And so I think this is a similar sort of a situation here where God is revealing to him, so he actually hears the voice of God. Now, God was evidently angry, but his anger was holy and righteous as opposed to what had been Elihu's anger. Now, remember last week when we met, that question came up. Is there such a thing as righteous indignation? And I think that there is. I think we saw Jesus when he went to the Temple Mount and he cleansed the temple. You know, he wasn't namby-pamby about it. He wasn't, you know, smiling and nice guy. He got angry and got out a whip and he drove everybody out of there. Of course, he's God and it's his house. So God is angry here, but with a different sort of anger. Elihu was just totally flabbergasted that nobody could get through. All right. The Lord initiated his speech by reminding Job of how he had questioned God's sense of justice. Though never cursing God, Job had reached a point during his ordeal when God seemed to be his enemy rather than his protector. So again, that's very, very important for us to understand. Now, over on page 48 of your study guide, there is a box entitled, based on the Hebrew word bereshit, which is the very first word of the book of Genesis of the Bible, in the beginning. And this is not about baseball, Dan. Okay, it's not about the Dodgers. It's not the big inning. It's the beginning. Okay. But even though it's not about baseball, Dan, would you please read that box for us?
In the beginning?
Yes.
The description of creation in the natural world in Job is harmonious with the creation story in Genesis. Both portray God as the author and creator of the universe, out of nothing. He created the light and the darkness, the dry land and the sea, the birds and the animals. The creation story found in Genesis, affirmed in Job, is vastly different than other creation accounts, such as an ancient story of creation found in the Babylonian epic. In this epic, many gods appear along with monsters who have poison flowing through their veins instead of blood. The gods and monsters attack and kill each other. For formation of the earth, according to this idolatrous account, begins when the god Marduk kills the monster Tiamat. The flesh of the monster Marduk divided. He formed a cunning path. He split her open like a flat fish into two halves. One half became the heavens, and the other half became the earth.
So is that Gilgamesh? The epics of Gilgamesh?
I think so, but I'm not totally sure.
Okay. Anyway, so yes, the Bible story is totally different. Now, I've watched a bunch of videos on creation and creationism, and of course, as you know, there's great debate as to how long it actually took. You know, was it 6 literal days? Was it longer? I'm not going to even get into that. But one of the things that is very interesting is the emphasis on the fact that in the beginning, God. So God did create all of this. This is not a cosmic accident. On the other hand, some of these speakers like John Lennox, who we would call a Christian apologist, basically thanks the scientists for the Big Bang Theory. You might say, why would you thank anybody for the Big Bang Theory? Because he says, well, you might not agree with all the details, but at least they, for the first time, are admitting there was a beginning. Okay? Things have not always existed the way they are now, which was the common theory for many years. Now they're saying at least there was a beginning. Well, here we have in the beginning God. And so again, we have a different story in Genesis. Now, one of the things that these apologists say is this. It's one thing for us to theorize. It's another thing to accept the Bible's account. Because if we believe the Bible's inspired by God, and if we believe then that Genesis is the way that God wanted to communicate to us what happened, He was the only one who was present at the beginning. Okay? He's the only eyewitness. So literally we have an eyewitness account from God as to how everything came into being. And so who are we to disagree, at least voraciously? You know, we may have an opinion, but again, we weren't there. And you can't put it in a test tube. You can't test it. We can't wind the universe back and try to figure things out. And so we have an account that is given to us. And so this account in Job is very similar to that what we see in the book of Genesis. On the top there, page 48, it says, God set him straight immediately, asking him a rhetorical question. What's a rhetorical question?
One in which the answer is already known.
Yes, it's very obvious, okay? That proved he did not understand God's plan for the ordering of the universe. That's another thing that some of these brilliant Christians have pointed out. They like to quote Albert Einstein. Now, Albert Einstein was not what we would call a great theologian. But Albert Einstein said, the only thing about the universe that is incomprehensible is that it is comprehensible. In other words, there's order, there's laws, and of course he was a brilliant physicist and figured out what some of these laws are. And so he was saying that obviously we live in an ordered universe. A number of other videos that I've watched recently have talked about the fact that we live in a balanced planet. I mean, everything on planet Earth is absolutely perfect for life. We don't find that elsewhere in the universe. And then the whole universe itself is very much fine-tuned so that everything just fits just perfectly. And so many, like J. Warner Wallace, I've referred to him, he has a whole series on creation as well. And he talks about the order of the universe. And this is what God is challenging Job with. You know, where were you when I did all this? Further on, it says, therefore the Lord told him to prepare himself for an inquisition. God said he would ask Job questions. By posing these questions to Job, God's intent was neither to condemn nor to humiliate his hurting servant, whom he himself had at least twice called blameless. God was showing concern for his servant, Job, had asked that his case be considered according to justice, and God was indeed granting him that request. So further down it says, Job had posed questions. And again, such questioning certainly could be taken as Job's criticism of the way God was handling his creation. So all of God's rhetorical questions focused on his awesome power. Going over to page 49 of your study guide, it talks about him building on the foundation stones. He talks about the earth's foundation. He talks about measuring, you know, who has measured the earth's dimensions, you know. He talks about the foundations as a firm base, the earth's footings and cornerstones. It's almost as if he's using the illustration of a building, okay? And the ancient buildings especially were a little bit different than ours today because many of them were built out of stone. And so the foundation was extremely important. The cornerstone was very important. Otherwise, everything else, you know, would be off. And so basically, God is asking Job, where were you when I did all this? Were you there to advise me, you know, to help me figure these things out? Now, further down it says, of course it was God and God alone who established the earth of creation. Job didn't even exist yet. Some, however, had been present. The morning stars, verse 7, possibly referring to angels, and the angels literally the sons of God, these cheered God on as he created. So there's some videos online that you can watch that try to unfold this whole question. You know, when did the angels, when were they created? When did they come into being? And so obviously angels are created beings, but they were created before man. And it sounds like they were created before the world in which we live today. But yet they themselves are created beings. So when were they created? When did this big fall take place? You know, when Satan rebelled against God? We really don't know. Other than the fact that by the time Adam and Eve were created and were placed in the garden, Satan already comes along and is God's enemy and tries to defeat his plan. So, all right. Further down, I have something highlighted. Such foolish pride. It can sometimes be tempting to think that we are in charge, that our good fortune, intelligence, money, or family lineage determines the outcome of events. Such foolish pride. So again, God reminds him that he was the only one responsible for creation. So, remember, everything that we have ultimately belongs to God. He created it, he owns it. We are just stewards of what he's given us. All right, verses 8 through 11 paint a beautiful picture of God's creation and limitation of the oceans. God asked Job, who had enabled the waters to burst forth from the womb. If you read the book of Genesis and you read the flood story, what does it say about the waters? They burst forth
from the depths.
So we have these really neat looking cartoons that we've made for little children. And we see Noah getting on a little boat and it starts to rain and there was a flood. Well, yeah, I think it did rain, but a lot of what came about that caused the world to be covered with water was water that was in the earth already that burst forth. Just recently, I read a scientific study, and lo and behold, scientists are now convinced that there is more water under the surface of the earth than there is on the surface of the earth. Really? So, yeah, so it wouldn't be very hard for God to flood the earth. The water just had to go back down. So, anyway. So the question was, you know, who's the one who put all this into being? Then, continuing the use of birth imagery, God noted that he had made the clouds as a garment for the sea. So we were talking last night at dinner about the fact that the state of Washington does not declare our rivers and our hydroelectric dams as a renewable resource. According to the state of Washington, water is not a renewable resource. Yet most of us understand the hydrological cycle. So the water goes down to the ocean, it evaporates into clouds, it comes back and it rains, and then goes down to the rivers, goes back out to the ocean, evaporates into clouds, and we have this cycle that keeps going on. If that's not a renewable resource, I'm not sure what is. Well, where did that come from? Well, God created it. God created it. The Lord went on to explain how he set the boundaries for the seas. And again, that's interesting because many creationists who believe in the flood story also accept the theory of what is called Pangea. Does anybody know what Pangea is? What is it?
One and only one continent.
Exactly. So if you take a look at the world's map and all the continents, if you shove them all together, it's like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
And so many people believe that during the flood, there was such a catastrophe in the earth that the continents actually broke apart and shifted. And so now you have all these different seas, but it's possible that there was...
That's why the water's underneath it now.
Yeah, yes. So very interesting. Very interesting. All right, such power. There was no limit to it. By now, Job, the complainer and skeptic, must have begun to understand at least somewhat about the immeasurable might and wisdom of God. So, who do we think we are anyway? All right, now I need a volunteer to read verses 12 through 21 of chapter 38.
Have you commanded the morning in your days and caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth, the wicked might be shaken out of it? It is turned like clay by the seal, and it stands out as a garment. From the wicked their light is withheld, and the high arm will be broken. Have you entered into the springs of the sea, or have you walked in search of the depths? Have the gates of death been opened to you? Or have you seen the doors of the shadow of death? Have you perceived the breadth of the earth? Declare if you know it all. Where is the path where light dwells? And as for darkness, where is its place? That you should take it to its boundary, and that you should know the paths to its house. Do you know it because you were born then, or because the number of your days is many?
Okay, so God's questions to Job flowed unrelentingly. Okay? Job doesn't even have a chance to answer, to figure out any of these things, does he? He turned now to asking Job about his knowledge of the dawn, verses 12 through 15, geography, 16 through 18, and light and darkness, 19 through 21. God was pounding away at Job's sense of importance. And I can't help but think when you see some of these debates between a Christian apologist and an atheist, I keep thinking of the scripture that says, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. That these men are fools in their own wisdom. I mean, they think they have everything figured out, and they simply don't. All right? So, first God wanted to know if Job caused the dawn to occur in the morning. Of course, God himself was in charge of the sunlight. God described vividly how the light comes to earth at sunrise. He said the light grabs the earth by its edges just as a person might grasp a rug. Then the light shakes the wicked out of it, just as a person might shake the dirt and dust from a rug. The message here is apparently that the light of the dawn catches wicked persons in the act of their evil deeds and forces them into the light, or truth, about their actions. Thus, God promised Job that wrongdoers, though they may avoid justice for a time, will receive what they deserve in the end. So we have an expert here on security. That's Vicki Dooley. Okay, she was the McGruff crime lady. What is one of the best things that a business or a home can do at night to prevent burglary?
Lock your doors and windows. Did I light? Oh,
Light!
Sorry,
Leave the lights
I'm thinking that the my first advice. Sorry,
Yeah,
light. No,
lights.
light.
Seriously.
Yeah,
Because
I failed.
most-
Darn it.
most criminals. Trudy, give her a negative. All right. No, seriously, yeah, locking your doors and windows is important, but if everything's still dark around your property, it's still a real temptation for crooks. But if there's lights, a lot of times crooks will stay away because they don't want people to see what they're doing. Okay, and so what we've done next door at the house, since nobody's living there at the moment, Mark Sutherland has put in some timers and some lights to make it look like, you know, lights come on and off, that somebody might actually be there. Okay, and so we put security lights around our building, you know. So, and
Men love darkness. Why?
yeah, because of their deeds.
Because their deeds are evil.
Yeah. So anyway, I've mentioned this before. People say, well, I don't see miracles. Really? You don't? Did the sun rise this morning? Seriously, we take so many things for granted because they happen on a regular basis. But the very fact that we live in such an ordered and well-balanced universe that we rotate around the sun, we rotate ourselves, and all these other planets keep everything in balance so that every morning the sun comes up, every night the sun goes down. We have 4 seasons, and you can actually look on your calendar, some calendars actually tell when sunrise and sunset are supposed to happen throughout the year. It's predictable, okay? Because we live in an ordered universe. It's not a surprise. Now, obviously, some days are cloudy and some days are clear, but basically, we have this order, and God set it all into place. So, all right, going over to the next column. Not only do the deeds of the wicked stand out at the dawn of the morning, but the shape of the earth stands out as well. God said the earth takes shape like clay under a seal. And he went on to talk about its features, its mountains, its valleys, its plains, stand out like those of a garment. Again, the planet we live in today, by the way, I've watched some of these videos by Del Tackett on his Genesis history where they cover the Noah's flood. Some of these scientists who are meteorologists believe that some of the things we see going on today is the earth still recovering from the flood. That prior to the flood, we didn't see hurricanes like one headed for Texas. We didn't have earthquakes. We didn't have some of these disasters. But this is still the earth trying to recover. And We live in a world that is different. And so theologians have some terms for it. It's the antediluvian world and the postdiluvian world. The antediluvian world is before the flood, the postdiluvian world is after the flood. And so one of the things that some of these scientists have covered is that Christians who believe the Bible believe in what is called catastrophism. Atheists believe in a constant universe. In other words, that everything has been slowly changing over time and everything can be measured. The Christian says, no, there was a catastrophe that hit the earth. That was the flood. And everything is now different. And what we are seeing is the results of that, like the Grand Canyon and places like that, are the results of the flood. So, all right, not yet finished with his commentary on evil deeds being exposed to the light. God stressed that the wicked are denied their light. So God is going to eventually take care, stop these wrongdoers. All right, God's next questions forced Job outside of his small circle of worry and took him to the farthest reaches of God's created world. First, God asked Job about journeying. He asked Job if he had ever traveled to the ocean's depths. Okay, now you might have been on a boat floating along the water, you might have taken a swim, or even gone a little skin diving, but most of us have never been to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Second, he asked him about seeing. The Lord questioned whether Job had ever seen the entrance to the abode of the dead. Third, he asked him about understanding. God wanted to hear if Job knew the great land masses of the earth. What Job learned from God's questions was how ignorant he was in comparison to the Lord's vast wisdom. So again, even the most brilliant scientist, John Lennox points this out, that a scientist may be very well knowledgeable and very wise in one specific area. But in other areas, they're just as stupid as everybody else, he says. Okay. And I don't know if you've ever met some of these brains, but they tend to be totally focused on one subject, and that's it. And like Albert Einstein, I am told there were days when they had to remind him that he had left the house without putting his pants on. Well, very famous story about Albert Einstein. He was traveling in a train through Europe, and they had these different compartments, and the conductor came to punch the tickets, and he punched the tickets of the other passengers. He went to punch Einstein's, and he couldn't find his ticket, and the conductor said, "Don't worry, Dr. Einstein, we know who you are." "Oh, I got to find my ticket." He went through his coats, he went through his briefcase. He's finally on his hands and knees underneath the seat looking for his ticket. And he says, "Dr. Einstein, don't worry, I believe you have a ticket. You don't need to find it." And Einstein said, "Yes, I do. I need to know where I'm going." He was so focused on certain things that everything else just turned into a blur. And so, yeah.
There's hope for me. I might be an Einstein.
That's special.
Somehow I think no comment is necessary.
The part about not knowing where I'm going, that's where I'm at.
So the Lord asked Job if he knew where light and darkness reside. So again, we're talking about the extent of his omnipotence and pointing out one of the ways he ordered the universe. Verse 21 provides another example of God's probing irony. God tested Job by saying that he should surely know about the mystery of light and darkness. For you were already born. You've already lived so many years.
Ouch.
Not really, okay? In these words, the Lord is teaching Job to accept God as God. No human, mere human, could understand all the workings of the universe, much less control it. Again, going back to John Lennox, he's been challenged by some of these brilliant scientists. Well, how could you believe that Jesus was truly God and truly man at the same time. And John Lennox will say, okay, I've got a question for you. I'll answer yours if you answer mine. Energy, do you believe in it? Oh yeah. Can you describe how it works? Oh yeah. Do you understand it? No. Well, here a minute ago, you were going to condemn me because I believe that Jesus was fully God and fully man at the same time, but I don't understand how that was possible. Yet you're talking about energy, and you see how it works, but you can't explain it to me. Why shouldn't I condemn you? You know, and he puts them in their place. Because, again, scientists don't like the mind. They can talk about the brain, but they don't understand the human mind, how it functions, you know, or why it functions. Well, it functions in some people.
But the thing is, I'm more excited about personalities. Maybe that's from my years of teaching. But in all of creation, I believe there's never been two personalities the same. Similar, but not the same. And all of that chemistry of the brain in no way explains a personality. It just doesn't. I believe that that's the second. Maybe they're simultaneous at conception. You get your gender and your personality at that moment. I believe that.
Okay, we need to read verses 22 through 30, please.
Have you entered the treasures of the snow, or have you seen the treasures of the hail, which I have reserved against the time of trouble, against the day of battle and war? By what way is the light diffused, or the east wind scattered upon the earth? Who has divided a channel for the overflowing waters, or a path for the thunderbolt, to cause it to rain on the earth where no man is, on the wilderness in which there are no people, to satisfy the desolate waste, and to cause the bud of the tender herb to spring forth? Does the rain have a father, or who has produced the drops of dew? From whose womb came the ice, and the frost of heaven, who gives it birth? The waters harden like stone, and the surface of the deep is frozen.
My dear wife hates verse 22 because it has that 4-letter word in it. Yeah, but it's biblical, isn't it? It's biblical. Many years ago, when Steve and Carolyn Henderson used to be a part of our church, and I was younger and a little bit more fit, we used to go mountain biking and hiking. And we've gone up into the Blue Mountains, into the wilderness area. And you come in around a trail and you come out to this field. And again, this is wilderness. Okay? Other than on the trail, hardly anybody ever goes up there. And yet, there's these unbelievable fields of wildflowers blooming. They're absolutely beautiful. Well, who planted them? You know, did some human go up there and till up the ground and start planting seeds? No, it's all done by nature. And there's obviously parts of the world that they get watered by rain or snowing on, you know, and things grow, and there's no human beings around at all. You know, how does this happen? Job, did you do all this? I mean, are you responsible for taking care of all of this is the question. So as the Lord pointed out various aspects of the universe, he pushed Job to consider the outer limits of his creation. But at this point in the Lord's speech, he came back to something a bit more common. He asked Job about weather. First snow and hail, then lightning, wind, and rain, then ice and frost. With each mention of the weather feature, God made it clear that he was the one who controlled it. Neither Job nor any human being could adjust or control the weather. This is an old expression. People talk about the weather all the time, but they don't do anything about it. Seriously, now we're supposed to have a heat wave, okay? Some of us would rather not have 100-degree weather, but I don't see Dan going up and adjusting the thermostat so it goes back into the 70s.
Just give me some time.
Give you some time. Okay. All right. With each mention of a weather feature, God made it clear that the one who controlled it. Neither Job nor any other human being could adjust or control the weather patterns. Indeed, even Job's knowledge of such patterns was lacking. In poetic language, God asked Job if he had ever entered the storehouses of the snow, or seen the storehouses of the hail. The Hebrew word translated storehouses is the same one translated arsenal in Jeremiah 50:25, which describes God storing up of the weapons of his wrath. The idea of an arsenal is carried through in this passage in Job, as God spoke of the snow and hail as weapons for days of war and battle. So we've already read in our readings of the Old Testament how God defeated the enemy sometimes without the army of Israel. Okay, and if you take a look again in Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39, the war of Gog and Magog, it's going to be very obvious who wins the battle, and it's not Israel, it's God. So, all right. Other natural weapons in God's arsenal were what? Lightning and wind. And again, the state of Texas right now is now on alert because this hurricane that came off the Atlantic and across the Mexican peninsula is now turning north and going across the Gulf of Mexico, and it's building up strength again and headed right towards either Louisiana or Texas. And so it's going to do damage. And again, who ultimately is in control of all this? It's not man, that's for sure. Again, I'm not trying to make a dogmatic point here, but a guy who was a former White House correspondent wrote a book, and it's been made into a video that we watched a few years ago, where he just asked this question: is this mere coincidence? Every time the United States of America has taken a stand against Israel, you can go into the news and you can find that almost simultaneously some sort of natural disaster hit the United States. Now, is that a mere coincidence? Or is it God trying to say something to us? I don't know. But again, he's not trying to be dogmatic, but he said it's uncanny. And he actually in this book charts, here's the event, here's what our government did, here's the catastrophe that took place. So, and one of the worst of them was Hurricane Katrina, which happened right after a major U.S. decision. So, interesting. Don't know. All right. God waters the dry places and makes creation beautiful. So again, there's areas where we as human beings don't even live, and yet these areas are taken care of. On the subject of rain, God had yet another question. This may have been a question that many people in Job's day were asking as well as answering by creating, telling, and retelling mythological stories about nature. Basically, God asked Job if the rain and dewdrops have a father and ice and frost have a mother. Traditionally, we have come up with explanations for weather. And I can remember when I was a kid in Southern California, we had thunder and lightning storms. And my mother told me that God was just driving his chariot across, and that was the rumbling that they heard with the thunder. Oh, okay. Well, we know that that's not true. But again, it's little stories that we tell that try. So your kid won't be scared when there's thunder. All right. No writer in the time and place of Job's story could have known anything about the freezing of the ocean's surface. And so we have icebreakers that go through the ocean. How is that possible? Because that's salt water. Okay, salt water is not supposed to freeze, right? Yet it does. In fact, some of the waters of the ocean are actually colder than the freezing point. So, like, have you ever heard the story of the Titanic? What did they hit? A chunk of ice, yes. In the ocean. How is that possible? All right. So God answered questions Job about the heavens. And that's going to be in chapter 38, verses 31 through 38.
Can you tie the cords to the Pleiades or loosen the belt of Orion? Can you bring out the constellation in its season? Or can you guide the bear with its cubs? Do you know the ordinances of heaven? Can you set their dominion over the earth? Can you lift up your voice to the clouds, that abundance of waters may cover you? Can you send lightning that they may go forth and say to you, here we are? Who has put wisdom in the inward parts, or who has given understanding to the heart? Who can number the clouds by wisdom? Or who can empty out the bottles of heaven, when the dust turns into hard clumps and the clods stick together?
So, as modern human beings who live in modern cities with electric lights and everything, we're generally not all aware of the night sky. But the ancients were. So remember, they didn't have all the lighting we have today. So when it was dark, it was dark. And they went out at night and they could look at the night sky. And they saw these, what we call constellations. And that, again, that's another miracle of the balance of the universe. That these constellations have existed for thousands of years, and they keep reoccurring on a regular basis. And so many of the ancients would take a look at this as almost like points on a piece of paper, and you draw a line between the points and it makes a picture. And so they came up with explanations of what these are supposed to be. And like you have the belt of Orion, the hunter, and things like that. One of the things that fascinated me was when we were on the Sea of Galilee, we stayed in a kibbutz about halfway up on the western side. So we were out of Tiberias. So when you went out at night, you could see the night sky. And we were there in February, and I looked up, and there's Orion, you know, that we can see here in the United States. Well, you can see it there as well. And so they actually came up with names and descriptions for what these constellations supposedly were. And again, God is asking Job, did you arrange all this? Did you put this all together? You know, is this your artwork up there? What is interesting, and again, I'm not so sure how far to take this, but Mark Sutherland's brother John likes to watch videos, and he's watched some videos where there are Christians who have studied the constellations and what's going on, and he claims that God oftentimes will let us know that he's going to do something by his arrangement of the stars, or whatever. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. I do know that if you read the New Testament and the Gospels and the story of the birth of Jesus, we see what?
The star.
Star of Bethlehem, exactly. And again, the wise men who came from the east, these are probably astrologers from Babylon who had been aware of biblical prophecy because of the Jews who lived in Babylon. And as they're looking at the night sky and they see this phenomenon take place, they believe that it is relative to the birth of the king. And so they come to honor this king. And so, does God do this? I'm not sure, you know. I think we need to be careful again on naming dates, you know, and this is what some of these fall into this trap. They say, well, if you look at this event and this event, that means this has to happen on this date. And I'm going, well, again, I firmly believe that Jesus said that we will never know the day or the hour. We know the season. But anyway, we do need to realize that the universe that we see, and of course now we have all these modern observatories and modern telescopes. We have the Hubble, and now they've put this new telescope up, and they can see further and further into the universe, and they can see more galaxies and more black holes and more everything. But they can't see an end of the universe, can they? And so what they're saying is that everything is totally, perfectly balanced. Wow. That's why we see things on a regular basis. Like Halley's Comet, it comes by every so many years because it's stuck in our solar system, and they can predict it. So, all right, we are out of time. So next week we'll get a little bit further into this. And again, we're going to eventually get into Ecclesiastes and the Song of Songs as well.